In the middle of the desert, a man stood up and called Moses, God's chosen prophet, a power-hungry fraud. This wasn't some foreign enemy or an outsider with a grudge. He was Moses' own cousin, a respected leader named Korah, and he had 250 of Israel's most influential men backing him up. This wasn't just a private disagreement. It was a public declaration of war against Israel's leadership. It was a bold challenge, not just to men, but to God himself. This showdown wouldn't end with a quiet debate. It would end with the earth literally opening its mouth to swallow men, their families, and everything they owned, burying them alive. It would end with fire falling from heaven. And it would end with a terrifying plague that wiped out thousands. This is the shocking story of Korah's rebellion, a story of jealousy, ambition, and the twisting of spiritual truth. But it's also a story that holds a hidden thread of unbelievable mercy, a story of redemption that rises from the ashes to create some of the most beautiful words in the entire Bible. What happens when people, so convinced of their own holiness, decide they know better than God? The answer is more terrifying and more hopeful than you can possibly imagine. To really get why this happened, you have to picture the scene. You're one of millions of Israelites wandering in the vast, unforgiving Sinai wilderness. For years, your world has been nothing but sand, rock, and a relentless sun. The generation that escaped slavery in Egypt, the one promised a land flowing with milk and honey, has been condemned to die in this wasteland because of their lack of faith. Morale is at rock bottom. People are restless, unhappy, and quick to complain. It's the perfect environment for a rebellion to take root. At the center of it all is Korah. Now, it's important to know that Korah wasn't a nobody. He was a man with serious status. As a Levite from the Kohathite clan, he was from the same tribe as Moses and Aaron. In fact, they were first cousins. The Kohathites had a sacred duty. They were responsible for carrying the most holy objects of the tabernacle, including the Ark of the Covenant itself. This was a position of huge privilege, putting him near the very heart of Israel's spiritual life. But for Korah, it wasn't enough. He looked at his cousins, Moses and Aaron, and a bitter jealousy started to grow. Moses was the leader and lawgiver, the man who spoke to God face to face. Aaron was the high priest, and only his direct descendants could serve in the priesthood. Korah, though a high-ranking Levite, was shut out of this inner circle. He saw the honor given to Aaron, and he wanted it for himself. He thought his lineage and his status made him just as worthy, and he took God's decision as a personal insult. He saw power, and he craved it. Pride and envy love company, and Korah was a skilled politician. He quickly found partners in his discontent. First, he teamed up with Dathan and Abiram. These men were from the tribe of Reuben, Jacob's firstborn son. In their culture, the firstborn was supposed to have the highest honor. Yet, their tribe had been passed over for leadership in favor of Levi. Dathan and Abiram were likely holding on to a deep tribal resentment, feeling they had been robbed of their rightful place. With his political alliance in place, Korah expanded his movement. He didn't just find a few angry guys. He recruited 250 chiefs of the congregation, chosen from the assembly, well-known men. These were the influencers of their day, the respected community leaders. This shows just how far the discontent had spread. This was no small protest. It was a powerful, orchestrated mutiny. Korah had successfully blended personal envy, tribal jealousy, and popular frustration into one dangerous force. Finally, with his influential army behind him, Korah came up with the perfect accusation, a brilliant half-truth that twisted God's own words. They marched up to Moses and Aaron and declared, "You have gone too far, for all in the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? This was an incredible piece of spin. After all, hadn't God himself said that Israel would be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation? Korah took that beautiful truth and turned it into a weapon. He used the language of holiness to hide his personal ambition. He was basically saying, if we're all holy, what makes you two so special? Who gave you the right to be the gatekeepers to God? It sounded like a fair democratic plea, but in reality, it was a direct attack on the divine order God had set up. The charge was made. The lines were drawn. So how does Moses react to this massive organized challenge from his own cousin and 250 national leaders? His response says it all. He doesn't get angry or defend himself. The Bible says, when Moses heard it, he fell on his face. This was an act of deep humility and desperation. He was throwing himself before God, the only one who could settle this. He knew right away this rebellion wasn't just against him and Aaron, it was against the Lord who appointed them. After turning to God, Moses stood up and faced Korah. He didn't argue. Instead, he proposed a test, a public trial to let God himself decide. He said, "In the morning the Lord will show who is his and who is holy. Do this. Take censers, Korah and all his company. Put fire in them and put incense on them before the Lord tomorrow, and the man whom the Lord chooses shall be the Holy One." To us, this might sound like a weird test, but for an Israelite, it was terrifying. A censer was a pan used for burning incense, and offering incense to God was a sacred duty reserved only for priests. For anyone else to do it was a death sentence. The Israelites had already seen what happens when you cross this line. Aaron's own sons, Nadab and Abihu, had been killed by fire from God for offering unauthorized fire. By telling Korah and his 250 followers to bring their own censers, Moses was calling their bluff in the most dramatic way possible. He was saying, "You want to be priests? Fine. Come and do what the priests do. But be warned, the God who guards his holiness will be the judge, and his judgment is swift." Moses then got to the heart of Korah's complaint. "Is it too small a thing for you," he asked, "that the God of Israel has separated you, to bring you near to himself, to do service in the tabernacle? And would you seek the priesthood also?" Moses reminded him of the incredible honor he already had as a Levite. But it wasn't enough. He wanted more. He wanted Aaron's job. While Korah prepared for the showdown, Moses called for Dathan and Abiram, the political wing of the rebellion. Their reply was dripping with contempt. "We will not come up," they said. They then launched into a bitter tirade, twisting reality with stunning boldness. They sarcastically asked Moses if it was a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you must also make yourself a prince over us. The irony is staggering. They called Egypt, the land where they were brutally enslaved, a land flowing with milk and honey. They blamed Moses for their own generation's faithlessness, which was the real reason they were stuck in the wilderness. Their refusal to even show up was an act of total defiance. The next morning, the tension was unbearable. At the entrance of the tabernacle, two groups faced off. On one side, Moses and Aaron. On the other, Korah and his 250 followers, each man holding a bronze censer, ready to offer the forbidden incense. Korah, the master politician, had stirred up the whole community, and a massive crowd gathered to watch. And then, it happened. The glorious presence of God appeared as a blinding light. A voice boomed, speaking to Moses and Aaron. "Get away from all these people so that I may instantly destroy them." God's wrath was about to consume not just the rebels, but the entire grumbling congregation that had come out to support them. In this terrifying moment, you see the difference between a true leader and a power grabber. While Korah sought power for himself, Moses and Aaron begged for mercy for the people. They fell on their faces again, pleading, "O God, must you be angry with all the people when only one man sins?" They stood in the gap for the very people who were cheering on their overthrow. God listened and agreed to focus his judgment only on the ringleaders. The final horrifying act was about to unfold. Following God's command, Moses turned to the crowd with one last chilling order. "Move away from the tents of these wicked men, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Do not touch anything they have, lest you be destroyed because of all their sins." A wave of panic surely swept through the crowd as people scrambled back, creating an empty circle around the rebels' tents. In that circle stood Dathan and Abiram, defiantly standing at the entrance of their tents with their wives, sons, and even their small children. They stood there, proud and unbending. Korah and his family were in their tent as well. They were completely isolated, surrounded by a sea of silent, terrified onlookers. With every eye on him, Moses delivered the final verdict. This would be the sign that God had sent him. He declared, "This is how you will know that the Lord has sent me. If these men die a natural death, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord does something entirely new, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up, then you will know that these men have despised the Lord." The words were barely out of his mouth when it happened with shocking speed. The ground beneath the rebels began to shake. With a terrifying roar, the earth split open. This wasn't a random earthquake. It was a targeted act of judgment. The ground literally opened up and swallowed Korah, Dathan, Abiram, their families, and all their possessions. Tents, belongings, and people vanished into the chasm. Then, just as quickly, the earth slammed shut, and they were gone. The watching Israelites screamed in terror and fled, yelling, "What if the earth swallows us too?" But the judgment wasn't over. At that very same moment, at the entrance of the tabernacle, a second judgment fell. A fire blazed out from God's presence and consumed all 250 rebel leaders who stood holding their censers. In one terrifying, coordinated act, both the political and spiritual leaders of the rebellion were wiped out. One group buried alive, the other incinerated by fire. The message couldn't have been clearer. Challenging God's chosen order is suicide. You'd think that such a devastating, supernatural event would end all complaints forever, but the stubbornness of the human heart is astonishing. The very next day, the entire community started grumbling again. This time, they accused Moses and Aaron directly. "You have killed the Lord's people." They witnessed a direct act of God and somehow concluded it was Moses' fault. This time, God's patience ran out. His glory appeared again, and a deadly plague erupted among the people. They started dying by the hundreds, then thousands. Seeing the devastation, Moses yelled for Aaron to act. Aaron, the man whose priesthood had just been attacked, grabbed his censer, filled it with fire from the holy altar, and ran into the middle of the dying crowd. Scripture gives us this incredible image. He stood between the dead and the living, and the plague stopped. Aaron, serving in the very role Korah coveted, made atonement for the people and saved them from total destruction. But before it was over, another 14,700 people had died, on top of those who died in the rebellion. The total cost of Korah's pride was catastrophic. The story of Korah is a chilling cautionary tale written in fire and earth. It's a stark warning against the destructive power of pride, envy, and ambition. Korah had a high and holy calling, but instead of being content, he let jealousy poison his heart. He used spiritual language, twisting the truth that all the congregation is holy, to justify his own lust for power. A tactic still used today to undermine and divide. His story teaches us that challenging the authorities God has established is, ultimately, challenging God himself. If you believe that true leadership comes from a place of humility, not ambition, type humility before honor in the comments below. But if the story ended there, it would only be a tale of judgment. Incredibly, it's not the end. Hidden in the book of Numbers is one of the most hope-filled lines in the entire Old Testament. In Numbers 26:11, after recounting the rebellion, the Bible adds a stunning detail. The sons of Korah did not die. Think about that. In the middle of this all-consuming judgment, God showed an unimaginable sliver of mercy. Rabbinic tradition suggests that Korah's sons, though maybe siding with their dad at first, had a change of heart. They listened to Moses' warning to get away and chose to obey God rather than follow their father. In that moment, they broke the chain of sin, and God spared them. This single act of mercy echoes down through the rest of the Bible. The family name Korah, once a symbol of rebellion, was redeemed. The descendants of Korah were not only spared, but restored to a place of honor. They became prominent worship leaders, temple gatekeepers, and renowned musicians for King David. Most incredibly, the sons of Korah are credited with writing 11 of the Psalms, including some of the most beloved poems of faith ever written. When you read Psalm 42, "As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God," you're hearing the voice of a rebel's descendant, a voice from a family that should have been wiped out. When you read the triumphant words of Psalm 46, "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way," you're hearing the testimony of men whose ancestors literally watched the earth give way. Their family history gave them a unique perspective on God's terrifying judgment and his even more surprising grace. So the legacy of Korah is a dual legacy. It's a terrifying story about the price of pride, but it's also a breathtaking story of redemption. It tells us that God's judgment on sin is real and severe, but his mercy can build a new future from the ashes of our worst failures. The name that began with a rebellion against God ended up writing songs of praise to him, a testament that no one's story is truly over as long as there is a turn toward him. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. If this story impacted you, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Until then, may you find contentment in your calling and hope in his endless mercy.